This is Faith Forward. And this podcast, we've created the space to explore our individual faith journeys. And we have come from a background of Baptist evangelical, and you can let us know your background in a second. And we're deconstructing that faith. This is open doors and ideas and connections. And we want to discuss this and work it out loud with an audience who might be going through the same thing. So, because everyone's spiritual identity is so different, even within the same denomination, we're going to start today with our backgrounds. And my name is Carolyn, and Faith is with me. This podcast is not named after her. She just got lucky enough to have that name. But I'm going to start. She's going to let me start today. So I was raised in a household where it was your choice to go to church or not. So my mom is not a believer. She was never a believer. And no one in my family was a church attender, except for my aunt who lived about an hour away. So I was very close with her, and I would go to her church, which was a Baptist church. But she did tell me clearly, like, even though it says we're Baptists, we're born again. She was very firm on that. So that was my first introduction to church, is with them. And the pastor was very friendly with us. He was at all our cookouts and our holidays, and he was kind of like one of the family members. So I started learning about church with them. I even went to a couple of VBS, Vacation Bible Schools. And my mom read me the Bible that my aunt bought me. Even though she didn't agree with that religion, like I said, she wanted us to make that choice. And so she wasn't going to censor us either. So I went to that church until I was about 16, 17. When I sat through a sermon about tolerance in school. And it was preaching, the pastor was preaching about how schools teach too much tolerance, and back then it was a different time, but we were as a society trying to become more understanding of other people. And this church was preaching, no, you should homeschool your kids. There's too many people in the public system that are saying that gay is okay, and you don't want homosexuals teaching your children. And I just sat there like with my mouth hanging open. Right. So I'm looking around and everybody's nodding. They're like, yeah, amen. And so I left. I walked out. I mean, I didn't walk out that day. After I left that day, I was like, this is not the God for me. This is what it's going to be like.
How old were you, Carolyn? Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely. Jump in. I was about 16.
Okay.
16 or 17. And I had already identified with the gay community. I knew I was a bisexual female. I go by she, her. And I knew that this community that my family was involved in was very much against that community that I identified with. I was very quiet with them. I didn't tell them for a long time. Eventually they figured it out. And, we got the age old, we don't hate the sinner, we hate the sin. But when you're in a household of family members who, and this was a house that had like up to 9 kids. Okay. So instead of calling each other like, hey, you're a butthead or you're a dork, they would be like, oh, you're a fag, you're a dyke, So loving the sinner didn't really feel like loving the sinner when you're hearing things like that. And I was like, you know what? I'm out of this. I stayed close with them, obviously, but I didn't go back to the church. Later in life, that Christian mentality that they had, that I think a lot of non-church folks associate Christians with, came out even more. They were aggressive. My grandparents were actively deteriorating, and they were not Christ-like in their pursuit of the the money, the jewelry that was left over, which is unfortunately very common. And so that kind of broke our family. And when my grandparents died, we split altogether. Last time I saw them was like over 10 years ago at the funeral. So a couple of years ago, about almost 4 years ago now, I had lost my job. I lost my house. I kicked my boyfriend out. I had nothing. So I was looking for anything that could help. I have been in therapy for like 20 plus years. I've been on different medications over the years too, but I still was lacking. What do they call that? The God-shaped hole. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard of that, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I went to find just a little relief. I was going to kind of church hop and find a good religion. And I ended up at what I didn't know at the time, if you can believe this, another born again church. They didn't use the term born again. They used the term Assemblies of God, which I had never heard before. So it wasn't until maybe 2 months in that I realized that they were born again. And that was deeply troubling for me because of my past. But they seemed a lot different. They seemed more modern, and they were very loving. And they were like, like, we understand that people have different lifestyle choices. Of course, not to trigger anybody, but that's how they put it. But they never seemed aggressive towards the gay community. And I was in a place where like I needed to heal me. So I did that first. When the quarantine hit, this was our first election year, me being in a church during an election year, and they were all Republicans, which is not what I identify as. And I braced myself. I knew it was going to be hard. But these are people that I had now considered my family, fallen in love with all of them. And we had supported each other through a lot of stuff. So I was learning how to be a good Christian and be understanding. And I was ready for the election. I wasn't ready for quarantine, the Black Lives Matter protests, the problems at the border down in Texas with Mexico, the wall, you and I have had many conversations about this, but for the interest of like introduction, like I watched every social issue unfold, and we were on the wrong side of every issue. And they kept trying to pack me. Nope, this is wrong, Carolyn. You got to do this. You got to think this. And then the church lessons started getting political, more political than the little like peppered in there than there was. It almost seemed like there was this frantic drive to keep the congregation on the same page when everybody was like, whoa, starting to think on their own and see these world issues. So when the second wave of mask wearing came around, the first wave was really hard because I wore my mask. I believed in the vaccine. Maybe not right away. I was but by the time the vaccine came out, I was ready to get it. And none of them wanted that, and none of them wanted to wear their masks. And it was just I was fighting with so many of my family members. I was getting in trouble a lot for hurting my brothers and sisters with my opinions.
And your family being the church and your brothers and sisters. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Family.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's how they would pose it to me. Whenever I would say something with an opinion that didn't match them, you're hurting your brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. You're hurting your family. You're hurting us. But I noticed a pattern where when I was upset or I had a problem, and I am a great communicator, nobody wanted to have that conversation with me, and nobody felt bad that they were hurting me as a sister in Christ. So when when the second wave came that we were going to put masks back on, and the congregation started fighting, saying like, let's fight the man and let's get arrested for this, and I'm ready to go to war, to like, I don't know, I couldn't understand anymore why a piece of cloth was so offensive over someone's face that could protect the more vulnerable of us. And I wasn't willing to go through that fight again. And, you know, I had already been in trouble so many times with my political views and my posts about socialism or whatever, but it was just too much. And so I met with my pastors. I let them know what I was doing. I let them know where I was going. And it was honestly the hardest decision I've ever made, walking away from them, because as much as it was so ugly in the end, they did heal a big part of me, because I was so much a part of their lives. I was living the same kind of life that my aunt was living. My pastor I was at their birthday parties and their kids' birthday parties, and we would have movie nights, and I'm not talking like everybody, I'm talking like, you know, like friends, like real family, like, hey, I'm coming over for Christmas, stopping by kind of deal. So that intimacy saved me in a huge way. They introduced me to God in a whole different way. And I know that I had to be there because I feel like God led me there for that time in my life. But leaving them has been just amounts of grief that I never thought I would have to go through. But I left, not before finding a new place to go, which was very different. Where I am now is very different from where I left. So I'm still learning this new system of things, but these people have the same ideas as I do. They believe that Jesus, you know, does the things that I feel like I read in the Bible, which I didn't feel like, you know, my old church was seeing. You know, I'm like, we're reading the same book and you guys are saying, let's fight for the rich guy and the white guy and the this, and that's just not what Jesus was doing. He was fighting for the poor and the sick and the foreigners and the people that society rejected. And all of a sudden I just was like, who's the Pharisees in this picture? So I'm in a new place and I'm learning how to navigate them, and I'm much happier now. I still have that residual leftover triggering grief sometimes, like it comes out sideways, but I'm learning how to manage it. And that's part of why I wanted to set this up, is because, you know, you've been through this in your own way. Mm-hmm. And I think the first thing we do is we research, we try to find what do we do now? Like, yes, I found a new church, but I want to know what happened with the old church. Like, how did that many people believe something that just feels so wrong? And I think that's where deconstruction comes in. And now it's more widely known and people are exploring that. TikTok is actually a big place where I learned a lot, which is funny because they're very against TikTok because Trump wanted to ban it. So it's just, there's so much more out there. And I've always had a big view of spirituality. Like my spirituality, I believe in reincarnation. I'm never sure on anything, honestly. I'm not sure if Jesus walked on water. I'm not sure if a baby was reborn from another soul. I don't know. I don't know if there's aliens, but I hold space for those ideas, and I just want to explore that. And so that's where I'm at right now. So that's my timeline. Faith, what's your timeline?
Well, mine is very similar and yet very different from yours. So this is interesting to compare notes. So I think a lot of people are exploring or coming coming to this head with their faith. At least I've noticed it online and the various online groups that are forming who have been evangelical in the past, but because of all of the uh, cognitive dissonance that's happening between what they believe and what they're seeing take place in our society, between politics, or what mostly politics, well, politics and the pandemic and social matters. There, it's making them question things a lot. And but interestingly enough, my story started. I actually started my deconstruction process right before Trump went into office, and I remember. I'll kind of go back after I tell this one story, but I remember looking. It was watching the TV and seeing a picture of Trump standing with one of some evangelical woman leader. Like it was a photo op, and them all standing together. And I just remembered just being completely in my inside was like, no, like I don't stand for this. Like this is not like I'm not okay, but I didn't understand why. But there just was this like this isn't right going on inside of me, and so I had to kind of explore that, and it took a long time. Anyhow, but to start at the beginning, I was born into a very religious, I guess you would call it. I didn't really have these words for it at the beginning, but it was an evangelical family who we entered. I entered into a Christian Missionary Alliance church that my grandpa was a pastor of, and my grandma and grandpa were went on to be missionaries after they pastored that church for a very long time. So I was there at church every time the doors were open. I church was the water I lived in growing up. We were always there for church on Sundays, there on Wednesday evenings for youth group, Friday evenings for other events, and then Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings. It was all encompassing, and that was
Oh,
nice to have friends, and that was the place where I had mentors, and it was a lot of really lovely, wonderful things with it. It gave me a good foundation for life, a right way to keep me out of trouble, and all of that. So there were a lot of good things that went along with it, but it was heavily ingrained in me. And then when got to college, I couldn't find myself a way that I never quite felt like I fit into those online campus groups like InterVarsity and Campus Crusade. So I kind of got out of it for a while. But I knew I would end up coming back to church at some point because my faith was very strong. And I always had a strong personal relationship. There's that term, but that gets used and abused a little bit. But
did you
very
go to church while you were in college, like on Sundays? Like, did you find a church there, or were you just
off and on I
waiting to come home?
did, but nothing regular. Maybe for a year I found a church I went to regularly, and then I kind of stopped. I just never found anything that fit. So anyhow, when me and my husband finally settled into the place where we are now, I was able to find a church that felt very familiar to what I grew up in, and I got very involved as I do with things. I even ended up working for them for 8, 10 years, different capacities. So it was very close, and I was very invested. I really loved the people. I still love the people. I still love the place. It's a great place. However, I started to have these these things that I just couldn't ignore anymore. The big ones for me were I would come and talk to the one of the pastors about like I don't know what to do with this issue of the gay lifestyle. Like I have friends and mentors who I deeply respect and love, and yet my faith is telling me that what they're doing is sin, and I don't know what to do with that. Like I don't know if I go and I confront them about it. Is that my responsibility? That doesn't seem right. That doesn't feel right to me. I had all these questions. I was just like, I don't know what to do with this. um, and another big thing that I kept putting to the back of my mind for years and years was the idea of biblical inerrancy and the fact that the Bible is absolutely true. So that was one of the things in every church that I ever attended that was the gold standard you had to, abide by. That was the ultimate pinnacle of your faith statements, was that the Bible is the inerrant word of God. And but it didn't quite logically sit with me. I'm like, I got to work that out sometime. I got to ask some people some questions. Well, when I finally did, I wasn't directly looking at that problem at the moment. I actually was looking into I do a lot of research on various things. At various times I get interested in different topics. And the one I was interested in at the time was communication, because part of what I do is help people with online communication for my job. And so I was reading a lot of the theory behind it, like what's the difference between marketing and communication? And I started reading a lot of stuff by a psychologist named Marshall Rosenberg, who talked about nonviolent communication. And I would listen to some YouTube videos and then read some books that he had written. As I was learning about his ideas on nonviolent communication, I completely knew that what he was talking about was exactly what Jesus was preaching. Like, I just knew that 100% here. And then once I finally, it just clicked. I remember where I was. I was just got out of the shower, and as you do when you're in the shower, thinking through all these thoughts. And I go, if God is love, and love is this way of living that is non-violent, which is completely accepting of another, which is completely non-judgmental, there is no way that the Bible can be the inerrant word of God if God is love. It can't be. All of that stuff in the Old Testament, we try to reconcile in different ways as evangelicals, as being, that you look at the dispensational theories, or all sorts of different twisting of the mind to make that make sense. I was just like, that can't be true. And then all of a sudden, I was like, if the Bible is not inerrant, then this other way of looking at the entire world changed for me. All of a sudden, I started to feel that I was not at war with the rest of the world. All of a sudden, I wasn't responsible for saving the rest of the world.
Yes.
I wasn't on a different team than the rest of the world.
Yes.
My gosh, I just started to have this love for people and a trust of people that I had never had before. And so that just felt like this is right. I mean, inside, I knew it was right. I knew that was the way that Jesus was talking about. And so then it started me deconstructing everything I had learned. And that's been a wild path of unlearning everything that I had learned and taken in, from the idea of original sin and believing that everything about me is wrong and evil, to trying to move into a spot where I can trust myself because God made me good. And that's a different way of looking at things. So things like that, so many things to unlearn. So where am I? So now, I mean, I'm still deconstructing. I feel like I'm doing more reconstructing than I am deconstructing these days. But it has been a wild journey, and not one that I ever would have expected to happen, because I believed my church, I believed my beliefs 150%. Absolutely, without a doubt. And I never expected this kind of change of mind to ever happen. So it's been wild, and it'll be fun to talk more about with you.
This is one of the biggest reasons why I think you're the perfect person to talk to, because when I was growing up, I always felt like closer to the gay community, and like I just wanted to be liked by my actual family. And so I was going to church with them, and I prayed to God. I asked him to like um help me understand and help me feel and believe that they the way they did. I couldn't get my hands on it. And when you talk about like changing your reality, you know, 4 years ago when I decided to get saved and actually got baptized, um, I you do especially people that are unchurched and become churched. Um, you they're asking you to change your whole reality, you know, and I did that. I did that because not because they told me to, but because there were things that were happening that I couldn't explain, and I fought it for a long time. You know, I was like, you got to prove it to me. You have to prove to me that God is real because I've done this before. And my life did change, and the things got better, and I felt a power beyond them. And that's how I knew God was real. What I love about your story is that essentially you were indoctrinated in, so you were raised in this belief. You, not to say you didn't have a choice, but when you're raised in that and that's just the way it is, that's your reality. So you walked away from an entire lifetime of a belief,
Mm-hmm.
and you weren't, it sounds like you weren't really looking to change anything. It's a God came to you and was like, hey, all right, now we're going to do something different. And, you know, maybe 5, 10 years ago, if you had had this realization, you wouldn't have had as many places to go to deconstruct. Like, you know, like this is feels like a very big time for spiritual awakening and discovery and things like that. So I thought your story was so interesting because I thought, here's a person who really believed it in the depths of their bones. And you were able to see, like, hey, what's happening is not loving.
Mm-hmm.
And then you came out on the other side of that. And I know it was like a feeling that bubbled up in you, but I always think to myself, like, how does that happen? Because there's all these people that I too still love. And I wanted to be that bridge. I wanted to be like, hey, let me show you, like, you can have God and gays, or you can have God and this or that. And
Mm-hmm.
um, it's it's almost like, the way I think about it now is like, it's almost like if you have like somebody with an addiction in your life, you can't convince them to not want to be addicted. Like they have to decide. It has to be with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really hard because when you start to understand something in a better way that's working better for you, you want everyone else to know and to understand. And the hardest thing for me has been to, well, and also it's this need to, or this desire to try to explain myself, like
Mhm.
not just being rebellious, you know, like I feel like I have to like explain all of these things to people to justify my beliefs. So how do I explain that? How do I convince people? And then what I find myself doing is going right back into the same frame of mind that I had over here, which was holding really
Right.
tightly to my beliefs and what I'm thinking and believing about the world. And so I have to keep on bringing myself back to this place that I know what I am believing and feeling right now in this moment. And this is where I am supposed to be. And then everybody else is on their own path as well.
Yeah, it really is,
So,
especially in the beginning, a lonely journey. Even if you have people that can guide you out of it, you know, even now, even though I have a loving community that is, you know, here to support me, it's a very quiet, personal, isolated thing that happens because
yeah.
from the place that we came, your upbringing, I'll use the word training, we're trained to to follow a certain set of rules. I mean, one of the biggest things for me, like kind of what you said, is like I feel free now, even though it's sad and it's there's a lot of emotions with that. I feel free because I was always being corrected, because there's a scripture that says, it's your job to correct your brothers and sisters, because what kind of Christian would you be if you saw somebody doing something that could hurt them and you didn't say anything?
Right.
So there's that responsibility coming back going, you're now responsible for all these people. So you're not allowed to really not be responsible for the body, because they've designed it that way where, you can't go off and do your own thing. You can't go through this on your own. Like, we need to monitor what you're doing. And if you have questions, which a lot of places don't like questions, but my place really had pushed, like, ask me any question you want. The thing is, they had an answer for almost everything, which is kind of suspect.
Yes.
One.
Yeah.
And
there's always an answer for everything in that environment, right?
But if there's something that I ask that they don't like, or I'm like, well, why wouldn't Jesus be okay with this? They'll show me a scripture, give me a line, put it in writing. And that's that literal sense that I realized too. Like I knew Christians, or my version of Christians, that the Bible was like the law. Those are the rules. That's literal. And then to come out of that and have a different pastor say to me, which I love this, the Bible is like your old racist uncle. You love him. He's got some good things to say, but he's in a whole different time period, and you got to take him with a grain of salt. Right. So that was the first time I heard, like, you don't have to have, like, it's almost like a test, show me the line. What's the verse that supports this or that? Yeah. And then if I give a verse, they're like, well, that's not what that means. That's not the right context. Yeah. Or this one's not literal, but this one is. So
yeah, I know. Well, I took the whole literal interpretation of the Bible so literally that I ended up going more fundamentalist in my beliefs for a while. I came this close to converting to Messianic Judaism, because if we're going to follow the Bible, then we need to also, if we're going to be literal about this, then let's go back and let's celebrate the holy days and the feasts and, the rules from the Old Testament. If you're going to be literal, you're going to hold to that inerrant, then why? Like, I felt like, anyways, so I went more fundamentalist for a while. I came this close, and then I had this kind of like breaking open about the idea of love and what that really means. It took me out of that into a whole other direction, unexpectedly, but
God was like, pump the brakes, girl.
Yeah. Hold on there. So
yeah, that it's definitely interesting to even be in the different forms of Christianity, never mind going into Judaism. But so if you were to go and be Jewish, wouldn't the Old Testament, well, wait a second, that's a whole other animal, because because when Jesus showed up, that's the New Testament, right? So when he was sacrificed, then you don't have to do rituals, you don't have to do all that other stuff, because isn't that the whole gig? Like,
well, that's okay. So yes, but where is that expressly? That's an interpretation again that I was like, maybe that's not correct. So maybe I was questioning a lot of things to begin with at that same time. That's an interpretation, but Jesus did say, "I didn't come to abolish to abolish the law, but to fulfill it." And so the way that I took it was, well, he came to make whole all of those Old Testament laws, and now we need to live into those still, was my thinking at the moment. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. Anyhow.
So now I know that you are in between churches. You were at, after leaving the church that you were at for what, 15,
About
12,
that.
15 years, you went to a different church
Mhm.
and decided, what denomination was that church that you came to after leaving the evangelical
Yeah,
group?
I went to an Episcopal church.
Now, what's the difference there? Because I don't know.
hmm Well, what I learned was that there are different kinds of Christianity. So that was, my mind was blown right there. Who knew that you could go to a Christian church that accepted homosexuals freely and openly into their congregation as
I
believers?
didn't know.
It didn't require them to change. Who knew?
Who knew?
So, I mean, I was blown away by that. So, the Episcopal Church was a good fit for me because it held a lot of traditions. So, it was very firmly rooted in traditions. Like it's a branch of off of the Catholic Church. So, it had a lot of the old traditions and rituals, but yeah, it was very forward thinking. It wasn't holding to the literal interpretation of the Bible. It was very much more interpretive, where you can interpret it for today and question how you make use of it in today's world. So it was a good fit for me. And now I'm just trying to decide where I want to be now. I don't know. We'll see.
Are you, because I know we've spoken before and you were talking about some new age stuff that you were dabbling, like looking into and just exploring.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
is it more that you don't know if you want to stay with the traditional stuff or just really go from, traditional is like, and maybe go to the whole other side and just see what's on the other end of that rainbow? Or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think I'm just kind of still in awe of the immense amount of possibility that is open to me as a free choosing individual. And I've also been completely in awe of being open to different ideas and ways of looking at things. That now that I'm free to do that, I see that it's given such more nuance and depth of field of depth of meaning to these ideas I already approached and began to learn about in my faith as a Christian. So I'm just obsessed with that. Like I love going over and reading, some books on the Sufi tradition, on Sufism, and reading these ideas about God and how this idea of God as a lover has opens up some of the, how I feel and some of my interactions with God over the years. Just it gives more language to be able to describe what I already have experienced. So I'm kind of really loving that, and I don't want to let that go. I don't want to just at this moment in time stick with one thing and just close my eyes off to everything again. I don't want that to ever happen.
are you afraid that if you commit to a church setting that you won't feel as free or you won't feel the same drive to explore?
I with the right church, and I know that there are churches out there where I would not.
Right.
I don't know. This is the thing that I keep going back and forth on. On one hand, I feel the need for really dedicating myself to a community of people to work with and to be with around those deeper things in life. But on the other hand, there's a lot of stuff that comes along with that. It's always ends up
Absolutely.
tough to live with, right?
Yeah. And I think that's something that even though I have found a new church, they are so, so different from everything that I'm used to that I have to really relearn not their ideas, but sort of just the way they govern themselves. I came from a place where my pastor planted the church with his wife, and they ran it, and they still run it. And yes, they have deacons, and yes, they kind of do answer to a higher up, but he makes all those decisions. And I'm now in a place where there's a lot of free thinking, a lot of democracy. There's a governing board, and the pastor is just the pastor. That person is there just to take care of the spiritual needs. Obviously she does a lot more than that, but you know
Wait, what? You said
that
a woman is allowed to be in charge of your church? Sorry, that was a new
that
for me too.
that was so exciting to me. I will say that when I found this person, I was like, a lady pastor.
I know. Because in the evangelical tradition I grew up in, it was always men.
I
Women were not allowed to lead, period.
I didn't know that. So when I was in the old church, I was like, hey, how come there's no like lady ushers? And they're like, well, we just don't have any. Like, it was never like women can't serve. I
Right.
mean, they want you in the nursery, they want you in the classrooms. And I'm like, oh, well, could I start preaching? I mean, they would say to me like, oh, you could be a preacher. But they had a men's group that was like preaching. And I said, oh, could I join the group and learn how to preach? And the pastor said, well, it's the men's group. I'm like, yeah, but doesn't the men's group just meet to learn how to be pastoring? And it was like, yeah, but it's for men. And I'm like, okay, but can it just be for people who want to preach the word? Well, I'd have to give you your own group, and I just don't have time for that. I'm like, okay, what if I just wrote my own sermons and sent them to your wife? And she looked at them. These are people that have been in ministry for 40 years, and they're going, oh, I wouldn't know if what's good or not. You wouldn't know 40 years of being in ministry? Okay. All right. All right. I'm picking up what you're putting down. I mean, I really was very naive because I asked questions like a kid, like, because I didn't know that a lot of the things I was asking or challenging were loaded with that history.
And this is a cool, contrast between yours and my experience is that you went in there, you're like,
Blind.
you were like, well, of course women can be leaders and teachers. Like, well, why? What is this resistance to this idea, right? That was your.
Yeah, I couldn't figure it out. I was like, what's wrong with you guys?
And mine, because I grew up in it, it was like, well, of course women can't teach. And there was this one instance where I applied for a job that was listed as being the children's ministry pastor. And I went in there and I said, look, here are the scriptures. Women cannot be pastors. So if I get this position, I do not want to be called a pastor. So I was really good at monitoring myself. I kept myself in check more than any other person.
Yeah, I felt like that too a lot. It's like, here I was soaking in all these lessons on forgiveness and how to deal with your family members, meaning them, and conflict resolution and doing the right thing. And then oh my God, I just lost my train of thought. I completely lost what I was going to say. Oh, I was talking about accountability. I found myself saying, well, you taught me this and you taught me that. Well, how come you're not doing it? How come this one's not doing it? How come that one's not doing it? You guys have been here longer than me. They called me a young Christian. Or you're a young Christian. I go, and young Christians were supposed to kind of yield to the mature Christians who'd been doing this longer. And I'm like, well, how come the mature Christians don't have this down yet? What the heck? And I would always be told, oh, well, they're still human. You have to hold space for them. I'm like, yeah, but like, you're not holding space for me. Like, what's going on here? So yeah, that accountability and that self-checking all the time is very parallel to growing up in a dysregulated household with trauma, and I see that a lot nowadays. People are talking about it a lot more, where you're hyper aware of what you're doing and you're hyper aware of what other people are doing.
Yeah, you know what my therapist calls it's like, because that's the thing, is like I've learned how to other reference like always be referencing others for how to act and behave as opposed to
Yeah.
being self-referencing. But yeah, and I think that aligns with experiences and working through living through trauma.
Yeah. And this, unfortunately, is religious trauma. And I think I didn't realize that that's what this was until I came to a new church. And that pastor was like, um, just so you know, this is abuse. And I thought to myself, I said, no, 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 like they mean well, like they're not bad people. They're
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
and like they didn't berate me. They didn't, like they tried to deal with me with loving kindness. They tried, I had a big problem in the beginning with the word abuse because I felt like these were people that I loved, and that the hard part about this is like it wasn't clear, like nobody punched me in the face or called me an ugly hag, like they they were they were abusive, and I don't think they know they are, like, and that's a little bit more sneaky.
It's helpful to, so if you had to define for someone what abuse is, could you do that? Like when you're talking about this, what exactly qualifies as being abuse, like being abused?
Like religious, in the religious sense.
Mm-hmm.
um from what I understand now, which I'm still working through, gaslighting is a big one.
What is
um
gaslighting? Because that's a term that I didn't know what it was for a long time, so it's good to
um
know.
Gaslighting is where you, and now, like, don't quote me, but this is my understanding,
Mm-hmm.
that it's where you're like, hey, this isn't right. And they're like, no, it's right. No, this is right. And then you're like, no, it's really not. And like, no, 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 it is. And then you start questioning yourself, like, well, maybe it is right. Maybe I am wrong. Even if it's something to be true, or, it's something that creates doubt. I had that in, I dated a guy that he was very good at that. I would say, like, well, why are you mad at me? Well, I'm not mad at you. You're mad at me. And I'd be like, well, I am. And then I'd be like, well, maybe I am, and then it makes you doubt yourself so much. And one of the big things that I would hear at church was, don't rely on your own emotions. Emotions are changing,
Yeah,
and they are unreliable. And
right.
when that word and when those, and I was born in July. I'm a Cancer zodiac. I have all the feelings all the time, everywhere. And they're telling me, if you can't control your feelings, then you are not a complete person.
And then
Like you have, huh?
how does that make you feel when you keep hearing that?
Terrible,
Yeah.
terrible. I would sit there and I would feel convicted. Like, why can't I get a hold of this? Like, I'm on medicine. I'm praying to God. Like, I'm serving in the ministry. Like, I was like you. Anytime those doors were open, I was there. I
Mm-hmm.
was a volunteer. I was the first one in, last one out. I was working in the kids ministry, in the tech ministry. Like, I had my hands in a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then to hear that, you know, everything that I did and everything that I was only as good as the last thing that happened. So if I posted something on Facebook about my political beliefs or whatever, and I upset everybody, I would then have to work extra hard for them to be loving again back to
Mm-hmm.
me. And that's one of the big reasons why I ended up leaving, is because every time that happened, they would lose a piece of me. And I'm like, I you're moving the finish line. And I'm only as good as the last thing I did or said. And you forget all the good things that I've done in the past. But they were like, and the answer I got to that was, well, you'll just have to just try and be better.
Well, and that is not because I know. I mean, and
I know.
that's not love, right? Love is
No.
accepting you as you are. It does not mean that you accept people hurting you, but you accept others as they are in the moment. Not that they have to change, not that they need to do better. They are good enough right now, and you have the wisdom in yourself to be able to know where you need to change. We all need guidance. We all need some help a little lot along the ways, but we ultimately have the answers for where to go next. Not somebody else, not the Bible, not the pastor.
Right.
You give when that is repeatedly uh, reinforced that you need to give away your own personal authority. That is controlling, and that becomes
Yes.
a control mechanism. And here's the key thing that people have to when like because I know that my former self, if I were listening to you talk about the church being abusive, I would have been like, that is a bunch of bull crap.
Right. It's
Because
offensive
I'm like,
almost.
I'm like, look at all these people, all of my friends. I certainly don't wish any ill towards anyone, and I don't think none of my pastors wish any harm towards anyone. There's
Right. And that's how I felt.
and nobody does. They're all wanting the best. They feel like in their heart they think that they believe they truly believe that they're doing the right thing
Yeah.
and working for the best of everybody around them. So, but that does not mean that abuse cannot happen and is not happening. And that is really hard for people to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially because it like I said, it does feel muddy to us because we are, we know that what they're saying to them, even though we feel it's wrong, we know that they believe that with their whole heart and being. They think they're helping.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I did not realize, in the end, at the very end, when I left, I pulled the senior pastor aside. I had a 2-hour meeting with him and I said, I need to know, if I get a girlfriend, would you have me leave this church? And he immediately, which is a tactic again, do you have a girlfriend? Immediately deflects. Well, no. Are you seeing somebody? No. Well, then let's not worry about it. And I went, whoa, let's worry about it, because I've poured my heart and soul into this place, into this community, into these people. I love everybody here. And I need to know if you have the ability and would use it to take them all away at any given chance.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, well, it would be rebelling. And I said, but that's between me and God, wouldn't it be? Well, what kind of pastor would I be if I just let you do that? It's you know what we believe here. I said, yeah, I know what you believe. I'm not asking you to change your belief. I'm not asking you to change the church's mission statement. I'm not asking you to marry me to a woman. I would never do that. I know that's disrespectful, because for you, that would be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not asking anything of you other than this. Would you let me sit in the back row quietly, listen to worship, listen to God's word, and just be in this building?
Yeah.
And the answer was no. And the reason for that was because essentially I was supposed to know better. And because I'm an intricate member in the community, I could influence other people, because apparently that's
Yeah.
so
That's
easy to do.
Yes, well, and that's, I mean, if I were to put myself in their shoes as leadership at a church, and I was still in that frame of thinking,
I'm not even saying being in the ministry. I'm saying remove myself from ministry, sitting quietly in the back, listening to God's word. That's all I wanted.
oh, I know, but see, the thing is that they're feeling those um, people in leadership at this type when you have that type of approach to the faith, is that you are taking on all that responsibility because everybody cannot trust themselves because they're inherently evil. You are taking on all that responsibility to make sure that they behave, that they are not going to end up in hell, that they are going to be. And so, like, a part of me just feels like horrible for them because they must be carrying so much, trying to protect everybody in this and keep them in this small little box of protection.
Yeah.
And so that's what he was trying to do with you. But in essence, what he
Yeah.
was doing with you was saying, you're saying, I just want you to love me as I am. And he was essentially saying, I cannot. And that sucks, right?
I think, yeah, it super sucks. I think as a pastor, and one of my closest friends who's a deacon there, she even said that wasn't fair of you to ask. How is that not fair? But your job is to love and to spread the word first. So what you're telling me is you would take the word of God away from me. You would take the opportunity to preach the word to me because of my life decisions.
Mm.
And I think that's what I was the most upset about, because I'm like, our job is to spread the word, spread the gospel. And it's like, now that you got me clocked in, like, oh, she's on the saved list, chick, she's on the number tally already. We're not going to keep going around and around on this, Carolyn. Like, we're not going to follow through with the rest of all that. I said to my friend, the deacon, wouldn't you rather me be in church and worship God and anywhere in a reaffirming church, an open and affirming and reconciling church? Wouldn't you rather me be in any church that talks about God than have no God?
Mm-hmm.
Then walk away from God altogether? Because that's what gay people do. They see that decision that a pastor will make and say, no, we'd rather not have you in the kingdom if you're going to be like that. I just appealed to the evangelical core to her and was like, you'd rather me give up God? And she was like, but wouldn't you rather try to meet God? I'm like, God's already met me.
Yeah.
He did all this. Okay. That's a him problem, and I don't remember. I remember her saying, I think she had said, like, obviously I don't want you to walk away from God. I go, well, if I can't worship in my home church and I'm rejected by the people who taught me about God, does that make you think that I really want to stick around and have that happen again and again and again? Not really. I chose to go to another church because I need a community. I have a job where I don't have coworkers or colleagues. I work alone, which works great for me until I need a social life. And I think something that you and I both have done is not put all our eggs in a church basket anymore. And yes, I have people at the church, but I didn't meet you through the church. You're on the outside, and I have other people that I know on the outside, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish with this, is that it's hard to find people that not only have left their faith, but are willing to talk about it, because they're not sure how other people are going to take it, because it's a really sensitive subject, especially when it comes to politics and especially when it comes to gay people. It's just.
Yeah, and also because the nature of those communities is that they're very tight knit groups of people. And so when there's you don't want to go talking about everything that your friends hold dear and feel like you're trashing it, which we're not, but
Yeah,
it feel I know that to them they might feel that way, and it's a very personal thing. It's just hard.
It's a hard spot for both. Yes.
It's hard. So you come from those close knit communities, so it is hard to talk about it because you don't want to hurt them or offend them or, alienate them.
I think that's why they had to disassociate with me, because especially my deacon friend, because she wants to be Christ-like so much, and she wants to be the bridge, and she wants to be a good representation. But I think hearing the way her community, which she's been in for 15 years, and I've only been in for 3.5, or was in for 3.5, it's hard for her to hear that her friends have hurt me as bad as they have. And it's hard to, like, kind of made her a middleman. So I think that's why I felt so much freedom when she was like, look, I need to break off. And I didn't expect that freedom until it happened. And I'm talking 2 months ago, like she was the last of the Mohegans there. And she was like, I need a break. I'm out. And the first thing I wanted to do, maybe a week later, was, which I had kept my new church a secret because I didn't want it to be trashed. I didn't want to get the text or the emails or whatever, which I already got a couple, like, where are you? They wanted to know what I was doing, where I was. And I posted where I was, and I didn't get any messages or texts or we're worried about you, or I didn't have to defend the place that I was at. I knew once they knew where I was that they would absolutely, textbook, I just know they're looking at it like, oh, I mean, she even told me at one point, you're going down the wrong path. And, she didn't know how to reach me anymore because I wasn't allowing her to correct me and I wasn't allowing her to tell me how to live. I was like, you need to let me just do it. And so now, like, I didn't even, since I've been out for about 6 months, I think to myself, okay, I've done all the things, but then something else comes up and you're like, oh, I didn't know I could do this too. Oh, wow. Now I feel freedom to post where I am, talk about my church, because I'm happy. I'm proud of the church that I'm at, but I just didn't want to deal with all the backlash. And now that I have that freedom to do it, I realize how unfree, how caged I was before, and how much they quieted my voice. So
Yeah, so if you had to compare the general approach of the last church to their guidance to you on how to live as to the current church and the guidance that they give you on how to live, how do you compare and contrast those two?
I have a perfect answer for this. I'm always looking for people to help me tell me how to be, not just because they're Christians, but because I'm very different in general. I don't act like the almost 40-year-old person that I am, act like a 15-year-old person that I'm not. Well, that I am and not. And so because I have big emotions and my family doesn't quite understand me, and most people don't really understand how I work, they have just learned to deal with it or work around. I'm in a good place now, but I wasn't always. I was more of a handful than I am now. So I looked to the old church to tell me what to do, to tell me how to be. And in this and they were more than happy to tell me. And then when I realized that I was never meeting any of those standards, it was just getting more painful and painful and painful. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. It's not my authentic self. And I've always believed in the authentic self. The first thing I did at the new church, which because of quarantine, this was a blessing. Not all churches do this, but because of quarantine and the pandemic, they had recorded like a year, maybe a year and a half of their services. So I went back and I watched all of them to get a feel of what they stood for. And I talk to the pastor a lot. I send a lot of notes where I just have her read them. And so she knows where I'm at in life. But when I ask a question now, like, what should I do? I literally did this yesterday. It's a little more rare. I don't ask what to do as much as I used to, unless I really feel like I need the actual guidance. Like, she poses a question back, and not in a roundabout way that leads to her end game. It leads to my end game. So when I say, what should I do? I'm posed with, and this has happened more than once. Well, how is this going to help you in your healing? Is this good for you in this way? How does this make you feel? Not to sound like a therapist, but like, look at your situation. She has me take it apart and I have to do the work. She's not handing me answers. I appreciate that. And if I really needed an answer, if I was really like, no, I really need you to tell me what to do in this situation, I feel like I would trust her, but I wouldn't put that on her the way I did with the others anymore, because I would do everything from like, I mean, as soon as I would start crying about something, I'd be on the phone. What do I do? Talk me through it. Talk me through it. And first of all, I don't have that option anymore because in the evangelical church, I did not know this, but they are different than other pastors. They are what they call unprofessional, and not in a damning way, but just they are in your life like a member of your family or a BFF.
Yeah, I think
And
most evangelical pastors are typically like that. I mean, that's a probably more common.
yeah, but I didn't know that. I thought all pastors were like that. So now I'm in a place where I can't pick up the phone. I mean, I could text my old pastor 10, 11 o'clock, see him on Facebook. Hey, I have a question, blah, 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 blah. And he'd answer me right away.
Yeah.
I don't have that. I don't have that, that hotline anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that I say or any issue that I have to present has to be very intentional, because this pastor, is just a pastor. It's, it's like your parent is not your friend when you're a kid.
She's not your buddy. She's there to pastor you and help, with certain spiritual things, correct?
Yeah, it's more of a, this is my spiritual therapist or my spiritual guide. And that's something that I'm still getting used to, but I know that this is right for me in this time because God needs me to kind of do it myself. But I still need a little hand to hold. So that's how I feel. Yeah, that's how I feel about that. I feel like it's always directed back to what's best for me, what works for me, and what keeps me safe. And that's a big, big deal, because I did not feel safe in the last place, especially in the end.
How specifically did you not feel safe? Like, can you share that? Or
yeah, I knew that there would come a day, even in the beginning, I knew there would become a day where they would leave. And so even though I loved them with my whole heart on my sleeve, got very involved, and everyone's like, be careful, this and that, I knew there'd be a day they'd leave because of what they believed. Mm-hmm. I knew that they would never come to my wedding if I got married. They wouldn't celebrate when I was in love, or if I tried to adopt a baby with my wife or something. I knew they wouldn't celebrate that. I knew that that would be disappointing to them. And that's just the gay side of it. But like my personality, people tend to like me a lot in the beginning, and then they realize how much work I am. And they're like, ooh, they just kind of slide out, which honestly, I don't blame anybody. It's a lot, but I knew even when I was serving in the ministry, I said to somebody once, I'm like, well, what happens if I ever got a girlfriend? Because I was never quiet about that. I was like, look, this is who I am. I'm not going to live in secret. Like, this is who I am. And they were like, well, we'd probably take you out of ministry. Well, I go, so I couldn't be in the nursery anymore? No. Well, maybe you could be on the cleaning team. Mm. So I can't change diapers, but I can wash your toilets. That's where I was like, I remember thinking at that point going, I need to be careful. So as much as I loved them, I also knew that I had to be careful how I shared things, who I shared them with, and that makes you feel unsafe. I'm a person that wants to live out loud, open book. I don't want to hide things, mm-hmm. But I knew that they would take things away from me if I was honest with everybody. The pastor could keep a secret. And because I wasn't, which I didn't find this out till much later, because I wasn't actively sinning, meaning I wasn't in a relationship with a girl, I've been single this whole time. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like a non-issue. It was just like, oh, okay, well, you're not actively being gay, so we'll just pretend that's not a thing. Yeah. And the more and more that I was like, well, I should have that option. That's when I knew. I was like, this is not a place that's going to support me, and it's going to hurt like a bitch.
Yeah.
So,
Ugh.
oh well.
It's just so sad and so tragic because they truly, because of the fact that they truly believe, I mean, and again, going back to the nature of abuse, they truly believe that they're doing the right thing. They don't think that they're being wrong or bad or whatever. And they're not, but what they're doing is hurtful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't believe what they're doing is wrong. And I think that's the hardest part about for like people like you and I who are leaving them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy. Like, we liken it to a divorce with like 100 people, like 100 people divorce at once. But it's not like, it's not clear. It's not like, oh, I'm leaving because we got in a big fight and I'm mad at you and I hate you. I'm leaving while I love you still
Yeah.
because you're not good for me. You're toxic. And so, but you don't know that you're toxic. So how can I be mad at you if you don't even know what you're doing? Forgive them. They know not what they do. So I think that's hard for it makes it muddy for us when we're trying to make sense of it because they don't know.
It's almost like as I'm thinking, just talking through it and thinking about it, it's almost like it's these are individuals just playing a role within an abusive system. And I really feel like, and it's lightly abusive, like there are scales of abuse, right?
Right.
I feel like, evangelical churches tend to be, I feel, this is my opinion, tend to be abusive systems because of the controlling nature of them. And it's not readily apparent, and it's not always to a level, and not always to a level where it becomes horrible, but and it certainly clashes with certain types of folks more than other folks. Um, I don't know.
It's a blurry line.
It is. It's all blurry, and it's a system, and there just needs to be. I think that what I would like to do in our conversations and stuff is just to explore these ways that it hasn't been good for expose some of the ways and hopefully make some people think, maybe give some support to people who are already feeling the same way, that they're not the only ones that are feeling that way.
Or maybe bring to light like the fact that some of this is wrong. And even though we know it in our hearts, like it doesn't feel right with us, a lot of times, like even after I left because I didn't like how I felt. I never thought someone would say, oh, you have religious trauma. You were religiously abused. When I think of religious abuse, I think priests touching little boys, like,
Yeah.
Which is terrible, obviously. But, I think what you're saying, I agree with you because like what I want is the same thing. I want people to hear what's happening and maybe go, oh, I don't have to realize this on my own. Somebody else is here saying it, because you and I just, I don't know, I feel like we've just kind of been like feeling our way through this new section of our lives. And
Yeah, I felt like it was when I started doing this, I felt completely alone, and like
yeah,
I thought that there must be something, like nobody else had ever thought these things before. Like nobody else was experiencing the same sort of thing. And then I started to, like, as I started doing research, I unearthed like groups of people who were literally going through the exact same thing, and they're the same questions, questioning the same things,
yeah,
having the same issues, and with this structure of very conservative evangelicalism that has taken over and become very popular in our country. And I think a lot of its faults are being exposed and need to be dealt with. Otherwise, the good thing is I think that people are leaving. And I think that people
yeah.
continue to leave if these concerns are not looked at and addressed and changed. So I'm hopeful, because either the people will leave and there'll be nothing left, or they'll look at it and they'll change, and people will stay, and the change is needed.
Right. So, as someone who started before me, what advice would you give to somebody who is starting out, who is maybe still in a church going, "Oh, this doesn't feel right," or who has just left and they don't know where to go, especially if they don't know people around them who they can talk to about deconstruction? What would your advice be to somebody? Like, where would your first step be? Where do you go?
First of all, I think you have to be sure and give yourself credit that what you're saying, what you're seeing, and what you're feeling has something to it that you need to explore, and to not dismiss it. That's the first thing, because I dismissed it for a long time. And then secondly, there are so many different resources. I could name some authors that are wonderful. One of them is Rachel Held Evans.
Yes, you turned me on to her. She was really good.
She has made the transition from an evangelical into an Episcopal priest. So she's wonderful to read any of her books.
She's passed away, actually.
She unfortunately, sadly, tragic. Yeah, she passed away a couple of years ago.
But there's a lot of content out there, that video books that you can look up.
Yeah, so I'll just give a couple of them. So one is Rachel Evans. The second one is Pete Enns. He has a podcast called The Bible for Normal People, and his community is excellent. That's where I started, and I was able to chat with a lot of different people who are going through the same thing. So he's really good. Another one that gives you another alternative Christian worldview that really just sits and just feels so right, and has made me believe again in Christianity, is Richard Rohr. And he's a Franciscan priest.
I like the Franciscans. I found somebody online that were Franciscans, and they seem to be really about love, very focused on love.
Yes, and the importance of the creation. So anything that he's written, again, wonderful. So I would give out those three names. There's a lot more, but that's
a good start, so we don't overwhelm. Because I did start with the Bible for Normal People is what my current pastor gave me, and then you told me about Rachel Held Evans. And when I watched Rachel on YouTube, I think the first thing I watched from her was a sermon or a speech called "Keep the Church Weird," and I was like, "Oh yes, okay." So so that's a good place for people to start. And then as we go forward, we'll just explore different topics and different just rabbit holes.
I think we explored all of them today. We could kind of dive into some of those rabbit holes.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And then we can just encourage conversation with whoever ends up finding us here. And then we'll see what happens. Maybe build a little community, which would be great. So with that, I will say goodbye to our first and last podcast ever. No, our first podcast. That'll be the end. And I'll attach links in the description for the people that you mentioned, so that we have a jumping off point for people. And we'll see you on the next one.
Sounds good. Thank you.